winner of the first Power Book is... Oh, Steve Jobs. No.
Steve Jobs. The man, the field, the turtleneck. Without him, Steve Wozniak's genius as an engineer and programmer would be revered only in hacker circles. A spin-off of Lucasfilm wouldn't have gotten the money to become Pixar. And Xerox PARC would have kept the graphical user interface as that neat thing they had for testing stuff. He was also prone to being incredibly rude with no prior warning, changed cars every 6 months because he found license plates ugly, and generally was the embodiment of the phrase,
"You're not wrong, Walter, you're just an asshole."
So on October the 5th, 2011, when he passed away due to pancreatic cancer and the belief that he could fruit juice his problem away, the tributes didn't take long. One of the best was Walter Isaacson's biography. Released just a couple of weeks after his death and written with his full cooperation, it is a sincere, warts and all look at the man. Presumably so sincere that Jobs knew how he'd react if he read it and declined to do so before publication. The book was a success and remains the definitive biography of Jobs, despite Apple's attempts to change that. It was also adapted to a movie, also called Steve Jobs, in 2015. The movie was less successful. And we'll get to the reasons why in a bit. But one of them has to be that it was simply beaten to the punch by a couple of years, by a movie simply titled Jobs.
Apple Incorporated went public this morning.
Can you tell that this is 2013? These two films are quite different for pieces supposedly covering the same person at around the same point in their lives. And that's why we're looking at them today. 2015 Steve Jobs is written by Aaron Sorkin from The West Wing and
You can't handle the truth!
Fame, and directed by Danny Boyle. The movie is structured as portraits of the man at 3 points of his life. The Macintosh launch in 1984, the launch of the NeXT computer in 1988, and the launch of the iMac in 1998. Jobs, released in 2013, is written by Matt Whiteley and seems to be his only outing in show business. A conventionally structured film, it can dramatize more of Steve's life, from 1974 and Jobs the barefoot college dropout hippie, to 2001 and the release of the iPod. It wastes some of this ability, as we'll see in a moment. The Sorkin movie, which is what I'll be calling it from now on to avoid confusing them, had a $42 million budget and they made the most out of it. Every section is beautifully shot, enough to make the backstage areas attractive, and Boyle makes sure that we see as much of them as we can. We make it all of 4 minutes before we're treated to a walk and talk, and although he couldn't squeeze any Gilbert and Sullivan references in it, the dialogue is polished to a mirror finish. The whole movie is. Even things that people could easily miss, like the different film technologies used on each of the segments to represent the passage of time. The Whiteley movie, by contrast, is much lower key and lower budget. For instance, compare what you've just seen with this, the iPod release. Or look at these two versions of the same event, Steve being ousted from Apple by the board of directors. In one, the scenery is just that. In the other, the scenery is acting just as hard as the people. But because we're not locked to very specific times, Whiteley can take us to many more places. Steve dropping out of college, discovering the Apple I, a built-in montage film in the actual garage where it all started, Steve being an asshole at Atari, being an asshole on the phone, being an asshole in meetings. It's much better at presenting that aspect of Jobs as unflatteringly as it deserves to be. It must be said, both movies also do a good job showcasing that he became much less caustic, if not less demanding, by the time he returned to Apple. However, both of them commit that most easily made sin when talking about Steve Jobs, ignoring almost everything he did in his years out of Apple. Looking at them, you'd think he did NeXT and then went into standby mode until Apple came knocking in late 1996. Sorkin even implies that NeXT was just a long game by Jobs to create something Apple would need so they'd hire him again. A giant leap of reality noticeable only to people who already had an interest in the history of Apple. The sort of people who would pay to see a Steve Jobs biopic, and then complain about history being made out of whole cloth. Making history out of whole cloth is nothing new for biopics. Picking out the highlights of a person's life in the 2 hours you get is difficult enough, never mind making them into a narrative that's interesting enough to keep the audience from leaving 15 minutes in. If you want the facts first and thorough recreation of someone's life, buy their biography. Sorkin's film was ostensibly based on the book, but there's plenty of reality distortion throughout. Apart from the made-up Batman gambit with Next Step, Joanna Hoffman stops working with Steve in the late 80s instead of sticking with him for life. The Time magazine cover that annoys Steve at the beginning of the movie was released a whole year before the launch of the Mac, though he really did think it would be him and was really upset when it wasn't. The Mac launch wasn't plagued by last-minute bugs. The iPhone was the cursed one in that regard. And as far as Whiteley is concerned, the characterization of Rod Holt, electrical engineer extraordinaire, was misleading to say the least. Apple did sue Microsoft over perceived copyright infringement, but it was version 2 and 3 that made Apple call the lawyers, long after Jobs had been ousted. Finally, there's no way any self-respecting designer working on tech would have a Riley elf on a mood board. Okay, that last one is just annoying to me, but really, out of all the cars. If Sorkin didn't claim that his 3-act play was based on Isaacson's book, the reality massaging would be much less intrusive. But it is, and so Whiteley just edges ahead for me on this one. Another one where I wanted to give the nod to the Whiteley film is casting. It's really packed with great talent. Hello J.K. Simmons, James Woods, and of course Ashton Kutcher. However, and this is a weird one for me to say, it may be a little bit too amazing. Michael Fassbender bears as much resemblance to Steve Jobs as Linus Sebastian does. But that manages to work out in his favor, because your suspension of disbelief can kick in and leave you to focus on other things. The dialogue, the scenery, the people whose likenesses you don't know off the top of your head. Meanwhile, the makeup thing on Jobs makes Ashton Kutcher have a much closer resemblance to Jobs. Well, I've already seen Ashton Kutcher in a 70s setting for more than 100 hours, which means I'd be completely sucked in on the plot only to all of a sudden go, oh look, there's Ashton Kutcher. Same with Josh Gad and Steve Wozniak. I never would have thought Seth Rogen would have made a better Woz, but here we are. So, I'm at the verge of having to conclude that between the two of them, the superior film is the one with actors that don't resemble the people they're supposed to play, and that's based on a book that was mostly thrown away. I would join the majority opinion on this one, with IMDb rating it better, but still mid. Rotten Tomatoes has them torn them apart, again in favor of the Sorkin movie. Though in this case I'm more inclined to go with IMDb because they highlight the apathy that people felt for these movies. So, how about I take a third route? How about we treat these movies as complementary to one another? Aaron Sorkin bathes Steve Jobs in idealistic charm. He's an asshole, sure. Any portrayal that glosses over that isn't worth the ink on the Steve Jobs face tattoo of the creator. But even on his most assholish moments, you can see Sorkin surrounding him with reasons to justify and humanize him. His complex relationship with his daughter, his self-confidence issues, even the movie's framing device helps. Nobody's at their best before a presentation, never mind the one that's make or break for the presenter. Much like when he did Politicians, you can see the idealism of the man shining through. And just like with Politicians, it kinda glosses over a lot of the unpleasantness that would force us to think more critically about the people we're looking. By contrast, Matt Whiteley goes ahead and covers everything that Sorkin ignored, allowing himself to portray the bits of Jobs that couldn't be seen moments away from standing in front of thousands. In doing this, he's more faithful to the biography and, giant and very important time skip aside, makes it a more complete portrayal. Even if Lisa gets all of 2 minutes of screen time, and the internal politics at Apple almost completely boil down to the evil chairman of the board that just really hates Jobs, and doesn't get he's a genius. Like we'd all be rooting for him if it was our stock tanking. At the end of the day, neither film was particularly successful. And I think it's because we don't need a movie to see Steve Jobs' legacy. His showmanship allowed the programmers and the creatives to disrupt home computing, animated films, music players, telephones. Sure, all of that already existed. But by getting people to rally behind his dictatorial vision for them, they were refined until they became the defining examples of their segments. With this in mind, and until Apple self-destructs in the hubris that only they can claim to have backing for, the best way to see the life of Steve Jobs and what it meant for the world is to see the world itself. And honestly, if you need more than that, just read the fucking book.